Our speaker tonight is Ed Anthony from a business called Mental Wellbeing in Schools. And mental well-being in schools has been a long and strong area of support for Stortford Valley Rotary through the support we've provided to aspects and quorum life education. And I'm sure Ed will explain further that mental health through this pandemic has been a major challenge for many, many families. And of course, that leads on to their children. Those of you that have done some research into Ed will have noted his company, Mental Wellbeing in Schools, is a community interest company. And last Friday, Ed, I joined a Rotary webinar where CICs and social enterprise were discussed and explained. And perhaps, Ed, you and I could have a discussion offline on that subject sometime. So before I hand over to Ed, I would like to invite Peter Blaskers to share with us his topical words of wisdom.
Well, I don't know about words of wisdom, but good evening, yes. Maybe give thanks for our meeting on Zoom, in lockdown, waiting for life to resume, hoping that soon we might be set free for the family to meet around the Christmas tree. Tonight, we'll hear how Ed's experience and tact helps families' well-being with effective impact.
Well done. Right, I'm now going to hand over to Ed for his talk. Ed, you need to unmute yourself, Ed, if you're not unmuted. There we go.
Thanks, Gordon.
Well done.
And thank you. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Okay, well, tonight I thought, I'll give you a bit of an overview as to what I'm doing at the moment. But just before I get to that, I just want to go back probably about 5 years to when I was a teacher at Herts and Essex. I worked at Boys High before that, and I grew up in this area. I went to Boys High, and when I was teaching, I had a lot of kids that were struggling in my form and in my classes, and it turned out that, well, I ended up getting a job at Herts and Essex. My mum worked at Herts and Essex, and she headed the wellbeing there. And she said, "Ed, you need to come on this coaching course. I have a place I need to fill." And I was like, "Mum, I don't want to come on a coaching course. I'm fine, thanks." And she said, "No, please come on it." And so I did it, and I quite enjoyed it. And then I got into looking into coaching, and I found this group in Florida that were tackling a lot of issues in schools and getting incredible results very quickly. So they were dealing with self-harm issues, anxiety issues, low attainment, poor attendance at school, and they were resolving these things really quickly. So I got in touch with the CEO, and I worked with her for 2 years, but probably about 4 months into working with her, my life started to change, and I was miserable. So, at that time, I was stressed out. I was working from 6 in the morning to 11 at night, every night as a teacher. I was, things weren't going well with my partner, my girlfriend. I hated my students. I hated my job. I hated marking. I hated the whole lot. And through talking to this woman, accidentally, I seemed to be happier. I seemed to be sleeping better. I seemed to be starting to enjoy my students. Everything started to improve in my life, and I could not understand it. And it wasn't until kind of like 4 months in, I was walking to school, and I was actually okay with going, and that just hadn't happened. And I felt content. That hadn't happened since I was about 6, and apart from the odd time, on holiday. And so it really got me interested, and we started to see change in students, just talking to students here and there. And so we started doing parents' evenings, and we got a group of year 11s, and we spent the whole year teaching them what I would call the inside out understanding. It's basically a new appreciation of how we work. And what we saw was we took 5 of the most challenging students in the school, and then 10 high achievers but highly anxious students. Well, we saw the anxiety disappear. We saw the dangerous behaviors disappear. And at the end of the year, we didn't need intervention for a single student. It just spread on its own throughout the whole year group, and the whole year group got resilient on their own. And so that was really interesting. And off the back of that, probably about a year later, I started Mental Wellbeing in Schools. And we work closely with Herts and Essex, we work closely with Wind Hill, and we had kind of moderate success, I'd say. And if it wasn't for, you know, people like Norma championing us constantly, and all of you guys, we never would have kept going. And when COVID came, it kind of killed the whole business off. We lost all of our contracts straight away. So after a couple of months off, I ended up contacting Ben Nesham at the NHS, who's a social prescriber. So he basically signposts people to different services. And we started working together with a few anxious families from about June time, maybe. And anyway, come October, we were getting some incredible results. And Dr. Stanley, who's head of the Stortford Valley and Villages Primary Care Network, then asked me to come on board and work for the PCN. So we've been doing this since October, very intensely. And basically, all of my sessions are on Zoom, and I deliver this understanding now to families in a family setting. So at school, we were, you know, parents could come to talks or look at our resources, but really we were dealing with the students. And even though we got good results in the students, a lot of the time, the deeper rooted issues that were still at home, sometimes they were changing, sometimes they weren't. But you know, we're far better placed now doing this through the NHS, in that we're getting into the homes of local families that have got major issues with anxiety or depression, self-harm, eating disorders, suicidal ideation, a whole host of different issues. And we're seeing some really, really encouraging results. And so what Dr. Stanley, I mean, Dr. Stanley is a real pioneer. I don't know if any of you know her, but she's doing some incredible work in that trust. And the whole point of what we're doing is that she's set up this thing called the Adolescent Social Prescription Service. So me and essentially Ben Nesham at the NHS signpost families to immediate help. So it's not like they're coming into the doctor's surgery and then waiting for support for 18 months from the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. They're getting immediate support. And that's coming from local services in the community, like YC Hertfordshire and myself and a host of other organisations. So this is brand new. This is a pilot that we're running till March. And the whole point of it is to basically produce a report that will then go to NHS leaders and government officials to highlight how we need to essentially revise the way that young people's mental health is dealt with in Britain at the moment. So it's rather exciting, and we're being pretty we're collecting a lot of data for it. But like I said, it's going to run till March. Now, I thought it might be a couple of case studies that I wanted to highlight that I thought might be of interest. So just to show you the power of this understanding, right? I had a lady get in touch that Ben was saying it'd be very, very difficult to help this lady. Her son won't engage at all. He's about 17. We're very worried about him. He's talking of suicide and other issues. He won't engage with the family at all. And he's got a younger brother, and we need help. And so anyway, we just started talking to mum and dad. That was it. No one else was involved. To this day, I still haven't met this young man. But through simply discussing with the parents why he's feeling what he is, getting them to understand why he's feeling the way he is, getting them to understand why they feel the way they do. We've seen the boy lighten, re-engage with his family, and actually have a very respectful and intimate relationship with his parents again. And this has come about very naturally, very organically. The suicidal ideation is gone. He's doing really well at school again now. He hasn't been to school for a long time. And everything is working. Now that simply came from essentially discussing two major kind of fundamental truths about human beings. Number one, we only experience our mind. So every single moment of our life, our experience is mental. So if we get on a roller coaster and we get a whole load of experiences from being on the roller coaster, we would naturally think that the experience is coming from the roller coaster. But the thing is, if we actually looked at the roller coaster, everybody on that ride's having a different experience. Some people are screaming, some people are bored because they've been on it 50 times, some people are crying and terrified of falling out. Like, it will be there'll be a massive mix in terms of the experience they're getting doing the same thing. And so what this points to is that our mind's creating our experiences all the time, lightning quick. And it will appear that they are coming from outside of us, but they're not. And so if someone says something nasty to you behind your back and you're not aware of it, it makes no difference. You become aware of it, then you start making meaning about it, and you start getting very negative experiences, lightning quick. And so we're all walking around innocently missing this fundamental truth that we're the reason for the feelings we have. We're the reason for the thoughts we have. We're the reason for the experiences that we have. And what this allows you to do is deal with major issues at their source. So instead of giving people techniques to try and solve their problems, you can go right to the source and start to essentially allow them to gain freedom from this. So that's the first thing, is that our whole experience of life is self-created by our mind, it's personalized, and it's internal. And the second thing is, well, what happens when the mind goes dead still? People can find the experience they get when their mind goes quiet. They find what I would call mental health. And so the reason that we have moods and that are I show the students this a lot. So here we've got a graph, and you can think of these as different levels of stress, essentially like different floors on a building. And down here we've got times of the day. So down here, our personality will be a very kind, loving human being. We'll be free from anxiety, free from fear, free from anger, free from confusion. We'll be connected, open, loving, creative, innovative people. And the world will look like a fun place. Our perceptions will be very positive, generally. Up here, our personality will be very different. We'll be agitated, we'll be frustrated, we'll be angry, we'll be mixed up and confused. We will take our thinking very seriously. Down here, we don't care much about what we think. Thoughts just flow past in our mind. Up here, we care a lot. We're very wedded to our beliefs, our opinions, our expectations, our judgments. And as a result, we live a very difficult life. And we really innocently believe that a lot of our problems are coming from the outside world. So we battle people in the outside world. We try and keep ourselves safe from them. We build a lot of mental walls to try and keep ourselves safe from threats in the outside world. And this is where we start to experience mental illness, when we get into these states. So we have to go into these stress states to experience mental illness. And they are simply a function of being in that state. So for me, if I can start to show people, well, all right, you're really, really you're really anxious about tests. So we went up recently to speak at the British Psychological Society about test anxiety. And what I wanted to show the society is that test anxiety is nothing to worry about. It's simply a function of being in a stress state. Now, if a person starts taking their experience of exam anxiety seriously, and they start trying to get rid of it, or they start judging themselves for it, well, they're just doing more thinking on top of thinking, and they'll get themselves locked in a cycle. And so this is why if you try and combat anxiety, depression, fear, low mood, all this kind of stuff, anger. If you start trying to combat that head on and you take it seriously and you don't realize that it's just thought in the moment, you'll get lost in your own thinking and it will never change because your level of stress is still up here. You're just spinning your wheels up here. But if you start to notice that it's simply a function of a very misguided state of mind, and you're open to changing your mind, you're open for your mind to naturally and organically settle, well, then it does. The perceptions clear up, everything purifies, and you settle down, you become peaceful, and those behaviors don't exist in that healthy state of mind. Those perceptions are very different of the world and yourself. And so, for me, people have to discover who they are truly. When all of the mental noise stops and quiets, they need to remember what it feels like to be happy and joyful. And when they rediscover this, then they're home free, they're safe. Now, I didn't know that this was here. In 2018, me and my girlfriend flew out to America to work with some of the psychiatrists and psychologists that teach this. And we went to the guy that I believe was the best in the world. And he lived on an American Indian reservation. It was actually an island in the Pacific, off the Pacific coast near Seattle. And, we'd had a hell of a journey. Like, I think the day before we went, my nan, who my girlfriend was super close to, died, and we had to bury her on the hottest day of the year. And, we had to stop the M11 the night before because we were on it and there was a massive motorbike crash and we were the first on the scene, and that was pretty gory. And then we didn't sleep. We got on the plane. I ended up spilling coffee over her like 3 hours into a 14-hour flight. And I almost caused a pile up on the highway. So it was a pretty intense journey. And we got up to this guy's house, got onto the island, and we said hello to his wife. And he took us through to his living room. And the whole side of the house was just glass. And, he was a teacher before he became a psychiatrist. So he said, thanks for coming here. And, I'm looking forward to working with you over these next 4 days. And we said, well, thank you for having us. I know you don't have many people over. And he just went, and he looked out the window. And he kept looking out the window. And I'm looking at my girlfriend thinking, we spent our life savings on this. Like, when is he going to start talking? I'm starting to get agitated, and 3 or 4 minutes in, he's still not said anything. He's still looking out the window. It's a beautiful view over the ocean, but I'm getting quite agitated. 5, 6 minutes in, I'm starting to read all the titles on his books because I'm getting bored. And then kind of 8, 9 minutes in, I'm starting to think, there's something, he's trying to teach me something here. He's got to be trying to teach me something. And I'm starting to give up. And then about 1/4 of an hour in, he starts talking to us. Now, lesson 1 was that he was waiting until we got down to here before he spoke, because he wanted to show us that there was nothing to learn if we're looking for a happier, easier experience of life. That it's inbuilt in everybody. Mental health is innate. And it's possible to completely lose your experience of it, but it never actually dies. Now, if you look at someone like Viktor Frankl, he went through Auschwitz, lost his wife and his son, had the most traumatic experiences of any human being on the planet, and he would have had the most traumatic memories of any human being on the planet. Yet if you read his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about what it was like when he rediscovered that state. And he wrote 16 books on happiness. It is impossible to break the human spirit. But just as the sunshine and the blue sky never really disappears, it can be completely obscured by cloud and we can't experience it anymore. Well, for me, this is what happens in our mind, is that we never lose this state of contentment, peace, fulfillment, creativity, and love. Never lost. But it can be completely obscure for years. And it's so innocent to misunderstand the experiences that we get. You know, the whole point of low moods is for us to wake up from them. That's why they're so uncomfortable. With what's meant to happen is you go, oh, I feel so uncomfortable, and you stop taking the way you see life seriously, and it flows and it changes and it dissolves. But culturally, we don't do that. We start to think into it. We start to try and figure out why we feel bad. We find loads of evidence for why we feel bad. We start taking things seriously. We start trying to change things, fix things, manage things. And as a result, we go deeper into it. And I was guilty of this for 25 years. But then starting to see that I can only trust my perceptions when I'm in a really nice feeling. And they're not worth anything when I'm not. Very dangerous, in fact. And starting to see that difference and starting to find who I was again allowed me to find freedom. It's that state that's ever present. And I go in and out of it all the time. I'm still spending like 70, 80% of my day in the red zone. But it's so lovely to just recognize, oh, I'm in the red zone. I'm doing that. And then letting it go, just getting on with life. And then at some point I'll realize, oh, okay, I feel much better. And so this is how we're seeing change in the community. So, I mean, and we had this in the homeless shelter. You know, I have one particular gentleman that we spoke to in one of our sessions. And as soon as I started to say to him, well, your stress goes up as you take your thinking seriously. We build lots of stories for why we feel the way we do. We make lots of meaning out of our thinking. And he popped, and he got it in a second. Now, I saw him 2 days later. He had 2 jobs and a place to live. It was immediate. His health popped back immediately as soon as he realized what he'd been doing with his ability to think. And so we're seeing this now in local families. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of the kids at the moment, obviously are highly anxious, and the parents are highly anxious as well. So not only have you got a child that's highly anxious, you've got a parent who's highly anxious as well. Now, 2 people in a really poor state of mind are not going to do well. They're going to argue, they're going to become bitter, they're going to blame each other, they're going to get frustrated. And the thing is that they will then come up with really poor solutions for trying to solve their problems. Anybody in a poor state of mind comes up with a really poor solution for their problem. So things never really change. But starting to show a family how they can support each other, starting to show them that it's an ecosystem, the family home, and that if one person holds the feeling, if the rest of the family are upset, eventually they will come down to meet them. And to me, it's kind of like a rowboat. You know, like for the rowboat, for the boat to actually work and to go anywhere, everybody has to pull the oars at the same time, and everybody has to want to be there. But what I'm seeing in families is very little respect for the common sense and the inbuilt health in all members of the family. But a lot of parents completely miss that their children have fantastic common sense and an innate sense of health. So they're in the family home with parents, and parents are unknowingly and innocently being quite disrespectful, very, very anxious, very wired, very insecure. And of course, the kids have grown up in this for years. They're picking this up. And, you know, whatever your parents think the reason for it is, they kind of adopt that reason as well. But starting to show people, hang a sec, everyone's kind of like, some people aren't rowing at all in this rowboat. They don't want to be there. They don't want to talk to you. They're spending all night on their phones or their Xbox. You know, you've got some other people are screaming at each other in the boat. Nothing's really working here. There's no synergy, because nobody at any time is really staying in a good feeling, in a state of unconditional love, and nobody's getting out of their own thinking. And so as people start to see that week on week, and I show them certain resources that settle them down and show them how this kind of trick of the mind works. And slowly they settle, they become more loving, they become more understanding, they start to see where they're going wrong, and they amend it. And I don't give people advice. I really believe that no human being needs advice ever. The issue always when confusion arises is that one thought system is fighting another internally and you're not aware of it. And if your mind clears, you will be able to see what's going on, and your perceptions will be good enough to make a positive move forward. And so what I see in parents again and again is parents who have read so many books, they've got so many techniques, they're trying to not screw things up. Well, you know, they start to notice, well, hang on a sec, I knew how to be a parent before reading all of these books. My common sense is good enough in terms of navigating this. So as they become more loving, they stop being disrespectful to their kids. They start asking for their kids' input into solving issues that have been going on for years. They're able to support them effectively by not constantly catastrophizing and just allowing their mood to naturally reset. And you know, it's starting to alleviate, or it's starting to, you know, alleviate some of the pressure that GPs are experiencing, because parents they're not going back to the GPs all the time for new referrals. And also we're making less referrals to CAMS. So it's starting to relieve pressure on the system. But obviously we've got quite a small group of people. I think there's probably about 50, 60 people in this particular adolescent area of the trust. So I don't know if that's useful, but that's how we're starting to see change, is that it's already in families. It's there, it's freeze-dried. We're just helping them unlock their natural common sense, because common sense is the sense of who you are. It's the sense of the common, the thing that we all share, which is this green zone. And any human being there doesn't experience suffering, no matter what the circumstances are. They don't experience suffering. And they're able to be very effective in what they do. And so we don't need to develop confidence. We don't need to develop resilience. We don't need to develop health. It's there, always, unchanging. It just needs to be accessed. It needs to be allowed out. It's kind of like the gates of a dam. It needs to be allowed out. And that's what we're trying to do. And, you know, some people get it quickly. Some people, it's a longer thing. Some people go off, come back, go off, come back. We're very kind of responsive to whatever that particular family want to do. And we are having dropouts, but I think we're probably operating on a kind of 70%, you know, 70% of our families are sticking with us and completing, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 sessions, which is pretty high. The national average for dropping out of therapy is about 50%. So it's definitely a positive step forward. And again, families spread it to other families. And we're now running, we've got a lot of people on our waiting list. So we're now running webinars, and we're creating resources online to basically support the people that are essentially in the holding area until we can get them into like one-on-one treatment. So yeah, so that's largely what we're doing. But if I kind of stop there and open it up to questions, would that be useful?
Yes, thanks very much, Ed. That's a fascinating way of looking at the problem. Right, there is one question which I'll read to you. Is the solution to our perceived mental health problems just talking to individuals or families, or are there techniques you use?
Sure, it's a good question. In terms of techniques, no techniques at all, because for me, a technique, if it's relied upon, it doesn't change the state of mind, and it's misunderstood. So, you know, a lot of the time at Hearts and Essex, I would have students who would be having panic attacks. Now, if you said to a student, well, you know, you're having a panic attack, here, let's try some breathing exercises. Now, if the student then calmed down and you said, well, why did you calm down? They go, well, I calmed down because I started to breathe better, breathing exercises. Well, for me, that's not the reason. The reason is that they were essentially fixated on something else. So when you get worried about something, it's like you kind of fixate it in your mind. And it's kind of like damming a river. And if you dam a river, you know, the water's going to back up and then it's going to pool and it's going to become stagnant. It's kind of what we do with our flow of thought. We get worried about something and we think into it, and it essentially stops the flow. And so, you know, a technique, if it ever is perceived to work, it works because the person focuses on the technique, forgets about what they're holding in their head, and it starts flowing again. So, you know, I always say to the kids, if you were really depressed and I got you to play with a puppy for 20 minutes, we'd see you in a better state of mind, because you'd be forced to not think about yourself, not fixate on where you are. You would have to engage with the dog. And that's the only reason. It's not the dog. But you could easily pin it on the dog because our senses make it look that way. So in terms of, sorry, Gordon, what was the first part of the question? Sorry, I'm doing well tonight.
Well, it was, is the solution to our perceived mental health problems just talking to individuals or families, or are there techniques you use?
Okay, well, in terms of the talking element, it can be useful. To me, a person really has to be willing to let go of what they think, and they have to start to insightfully see. Now, so I could tell somebody how to be mentally healthy, word for word. It could be absolutely correct, and it won't make a blind bit of difference. I've worked with plenty of people who have gone, I'm not interested in this. This isn't working. And that person has to, for them to experience change, they have to really understand. So, you know, like kids in class, they don't get something, they ask their friend what the teacher meant, and the friend explains it in a different way, and they go, oh, I get it now. I had that light bulb moment. So for me, that's a jump in understanding. That's really important. That's a jump in understanding there. And it's what Einstein would call a higher level of consciousness. Einstein said, in order to change anything, you have to elevate the level of consciousness you're at. So if I think really intensely about something in a very stressed state, it won't change. I'll get mixed up. I'll get some poor ideas. If I allow my consciousness to rise, my head to clear, same thing, I will start to get some good ideas. So for me, we have to elevate people's consciousness. Now that can happen in a variety of ways, right? When I go to an Eric Clapton concert, the only reason people love Clapton is because when he goes and plays, he elevates his consciousness. He always says, I forget about me. It's got nothing to do with me. It's God-given talent. And you'll see this with Barbra Streisand. She doesn't do anything with her voice, no training at all. She just walks on stage and she says, I let go and let God. It's the same with sportsmen who talk about being in the zone. We can't get there through willpower, and we can't get there through intellectual understanding. It's of absolutely no use at all. So you could study, you know, the teachings of the Buddha, Jesus, and the Stoics till the cows come home, and you could memorize every word, but it would be quite possible that your life wouldn't improve. Mine didn't actually. I took a hell of a lot of notes on those books, and my life didn't get any better. In fact, it got worse. But when you start to see that you've forgotten who you are, and you start to truly give up and have a realization as to who you are, or a realization with regards to something you've misunderstood about life, then you change for life. So for instance, I remember, it must have been about a year into this, my girlfriend, she's a songwriter, she writes musicals. And we're sitting in the studio and she's doing some work on something. And it just hit me that we can't get love from other people. I just knew it. It just occurred. And now you see, from a very young age, I built a misunderstanding about life. I thought that if people acted in a certain way, then I essentially got love from them. And if they acted another way, then it was like they were taking love away. And I didn't realize I built this. But as soon as I saw where love came from, that it was innately locked into us. And when we got into a good mood, it was just overflows, it comes out. It's something that just bubbles up like a geyser. It really changed our relationship, because it made me much less I had much less judgment on her actions and her state of mind. I had very few expectations of her anymore. And so there was a lot less thinking in between us. So in terms of change, people's minds have to settle, essentially. That's what has to happen. And they have to have a realization that they spent many years misunderstanding a lot of things about life. And that's why it's kind of essential a lot of the time to have this one-on-one component, because, all right, people start to understand what I'm saying, but a lot of people build misunderstandings as a result of what I'm saying. So a lot of people will try and just think differently, or they'll think I'm talking about positive thinking. And I'm not talking about positive thinking at all. I'm just saying that when you're in a good mood, you will naturally think positively. It's a very different thing, because a lot of people get into a bad mood, they try and think positively and they get even worse. And so starting to show people that really you are living in your own world, and all the issues that you're experiencing come from your own world. That's what changes people. And when people interact in a family, if there is a clear channel here, their minds are quiet and silent, then they'll interact, they'll get on well, right? But what happens most of the time is that we start to upload a story of our life and that person. So if you've got a particular uncle that you don't want to be around, you don't like, you think they make you feel bad. Well, no, really what happens is you have some negative thinking when you're around them and you misattribute it to them. And in families, what I see is two people with very strong beliefs and ideas, and they don't know they're doing that, but they can't communicate. There's no straight channel for actual communication. And so people have to get rid of this. Their mind has to settle. All the noise, all the beliefs and opinions, they have to be willing to surrender, to ignore. That's how you change the world. You have a jump in consciousness, which is what Einstein always said. And
I think we can all relate to much of that. Can you, other question? I know Peter's got a supplementary question to that, but can I give others a chance? Anne-Louise, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, I've done that. Yes, you talked about CAMS, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, which obviously you know about a lot because you worked in a school. And I know that the referral times for CAMS is very long at the moment. Do you work at all with them?
No, I have very little to do with CAMS at all. Really nothing. No, but the chap Ben Nesham that I work with, he's working with them all the time, and Dr. Stanley is obviously in regular communication with, a whole host of CAMS workers.
Mm-hmm. And yeah. Do you see a place for your sort of work to be adopted by CAMS?
It's the hope. It's the real hope. But the thing about this work is, I've been up to Parliament and talked about this. I've been to the British Psychological Society to talk about it. This is very challenging to a lot of professionals in the mental health sector, because essentially what I'm going against traditional doctrine. And so all of the guys that are working in the States, all the mental health professionals in the States, they will tell you that when they came across this, that they had quite a few months or years struggling to let go of everything that they traditionally been taught. But eventually they did, just because the results were so compelling. But it's very difficult to get across, because people misunderstand what you're saying, and also it goes against the training. So I think eventually it will be, it will be taken on, because it's the way that life works. This isn't a new understanding really of life. It's seeing what's actually happening. It's just it's just looking at some fundamental truths about human beings. But it's I mean, it took me a long time. God, I hated this. This took me, I spent a whole year, you know, really pretty unsure. Life was even getting better and I was still pretty unsure that this was the case. I read so many books on quantum physics and things. But yeah, so I'm hoping that one day it will go into CAMHS. I mean, really what I would like is I count myself as a mental health educator, and I feel that really all the small trusts in the UK could do with a couple of mental health educators that are essentially working with families to support them, so that all these low level, you know, anxiety disorders, depression issues and everything else isn't reaching CAMHS, so that CAMHS are not so oversubscribed. They can really support people with very, very serious mental health conditions. You know, I see that as really the kind of the aim of the community organisations, to take that load off CAMHS and GPs and return families to a kind of better place, really.
Okay, Peter Blaskus has got a question.
Yes, I had. There's a quotation, isn't there? When all about you is difficulty and so on, and everybody else is taking shelter, and you're not. Maybe you've misunderstood the situation. And it seems to me what you're proposing sounds marvellous, but it looks like a complete character change from one person character to the next in the course of your treatment.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, it can be very stark, Peter. Yeah. As soon as it's, to me, it's kind of like if your hand's really hurting, you haven't noticed that you're holding it on a burner on the cooker. As soon as you notice what you're doing, you're going to go, oh, like you won't need a technique to get that. You just naturally do it. Well, as soon as someone starts to notice, they're creating a huge amount of anxiety through the way that they're using their ability to think. It doesn't make any sense to do it if they can see that what they're thinking isn't true, that it's just a made up experience that they're creating. When they see that, you're home free. I mean, so in terms of, I'm trying to think of a very stark change. I mean, to be honest with you, most of the change that it's really tough because I can't remember through doing all of this many moments where the kids went, oh my God, that thing's not real. I get it from adults sometimes, but very rarely will I get it from kids. But then the behavior changes. I mean, from week 1 to week 6, they can be so totally different. But yeah, it's a real gradual subconscious thing, because essentially what we're doing is cleaning the subconscious. The subconscious is doing way too much work and it just needs to settle, and when it's quiet, then it works fine. It's kind of like we have a societal normal in terms of our thinking speed and our thinking noise, and then we have a natural level that we're meant to be at, that we hit in the middle of a holiday. And we're meant to spend our days 90% of the day in this space, but everyone around us, you know, in our conditioning forces us to spend it in high levels of noise and high levels of quick thinking. So as that just naturally comes down, then you do see that stark character change. And it can happen in a second, you know, as soon as you realize it, you know, it's 1 second change, but I can't think of that many times where I've seen it in the kids. Yeah, it's a slower change generally, but within 6-week period, you do see a big change.
Okay, Stephen Turner's got a question, I think.
Yeah,
Hi there. Hi Ed. A year or so ago, I came and spoke to this group, as you did tonight, about the work of Samaritans.
Yeah.
And I have worked given talks to children in school, and I taught science, so there's a bit of thing going on here. But my thing is all about needing to. On the phone at Samaritans, people talk about we talk about the need to talk, the benefits of talking, and often the answer is in your own head, as you described, I think. So I'm just in that place, I'm a facilitator for a caller to talk about how things are, and I'm wondering if that's how you view yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. Yeah, completely. You know, all I can be as a guide, I can point stuff out that they haven't noticed, that and kind of help them understand why they feel the way they do. But in terms of, are they going to get better? Are they going to change? You get 0% say in that. You know, it's completely up to them. But if you weren't there, they wouldn't have a chance. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
And certainly on the telephone, callers in many cases they ring up because they are properly up in the red zone, and after quite a while sometimes they come down, and when I first meet someone who's crying their eyes out, and then eventually they can smile with me over the telephone and laugh and joke, and then the job's done for a moment sometimes.
That's it. But that's the thing, is that's enough to really to balance them for quite a while, plenty of times. But it's really important that people understand why. So young kids are so resilient because they'll go into the red zone and then they'll pop out again. The bounce back is excellent, but they don't understand why. And so that's the issue, is you want to provide that level of understanding where they can start to essentially process the fact that this is just an experience, and it's a very stressful experience, and then they can ignore it. So I kind of feel it's important that we start to break down these ideas of who we are, because we identify with the red version, and there's all these kind of, people's family cultures are so strong. You know, you grow up with a lot of the bad habits that your parents have, or a lot of the viewpoints that your parents have or your teachers have, and starting to see that that's not who you are. There's family stories and family conditions that people are worried about catching or having all the time, and these are all you're doing is identifying with a very red version of yourself, and starting to see that's not who you are brings so much freedom. Starting to see how you work brings so much freedom. But without places like the Samaritans, I mean, so many people would have lost their lives. They're just the most incredible organizations.
David Chandler's got a question. Daniel.
Hi, Ed. The speech was brilliant. Brilliant speech there. I was quite taken aback, actually. Just lots, pretty much everything that you were saying just hit home. So yeah, thank you for that. What I was going to ask is, are you working with many primary schools, or is it mainly secondary?
Well, so
historically.
Yeah. Well, Windhill was the major one that we worked with, but to be honest with you, Dan, now it's just NHS.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I found primary school quite difficult. To the kids were young, even with year 6, it wasn't that effective. What we developed, I don't think that was effective.
That is, there must be a level where you can start.
Yeah, well, you know what? We tried it at Hearts and Essex with 7s as well, and that was a complete failure. So we found, to be honest, year 10 and 11 was a sweet spot, and obviously sixth form were interested. But there is, it's very tough to call, in that, like, we had a very successful first year, and then we tried to replicate what we did the next year, and it wasn't nearly as successful. And then we tried to do it again in the third year. We thought we got something wrong. We tried it again, and it was even less successful. And so, I mean, what I came to see in terms of buying at schools was that you needed a teacher who got it in their bones, who really understood it. Those kids only turned up because I had a good relationship with them, or they heard good things about me from other kids. when I left the school after that first year and started teaching it just generally, the buy-in was so much smaller. It was quite amazing to me. And I think there's a place for a certain amount of it in a school, in that show kids that everything they're feeling is coming from their head. Their brain's connected to all of their glands and all of their nerves and everything else. Show them that. Show them that nobody else can make them feel bad. That's important.
Yeah.
And show them that give them a list of all the things you do in red and all the things you do in green, and make them start to appreciate that they're just bad habits. That's useful. But in terms of getting them to experience it, I would say that's very difficult in a school setting.
Yeah, which I think is caused by expectations.
Expectation is a big problem.
Which is driven by peers, by parents, by teachers, by social media, everything else, which is causing most of the problems.
That's it. For me, the ability to think, the power of thought is a tool. If you use the tool effectively, it's really useful. Like, it can create, it's essentially the power that all of our cells are using. So all of our cells work together because of the energy that we are, and we mold this energy in terms of our awareness. And just starting to appreciate that, when you're in a good place, you use it for a lot of good. And then when you get into those darker states of mind, you use it for a lot of evil. It's just like, if you use a hammer to bang a nail in, it's a useful tool. If you turn it on yourself and use it as a weapon, you can create a hell of a lot of damage. And this is what we do.
Could I invite Colin George? Got a question?
Yeah, Ed, do you feel there are any other approaches that are being tried, are going in the same sort of educational direction as your approach? For example, mindfulness, protective behaviours, attempts to enable children particularly to get to a state of mind that I think comes into your lower zone. I just wondered your comments.
Yeah, well, I think I think all this move towards mindfulness and mental health awareness is a really positive thing. The only thing that I have seen, and I've seen this in schools in Stortford, that when it is taught, so for instance, mindfulness is useful, but mindfulness, again, doesn't get, if it's taught in the right way, very powerful. If it's taught in the wrong way, quite dangerous. Same with any kind of mental, so when we're up at the British Psychological Society, I couldn't believe this, but this is what's going to happen, is that the government are about to roll out, they're getting teachers to teach mental health education in PSHE. Now, on the face of it, that would be a good thing, making people aware of this. But in the trials that they're doing, you're getting the most horrendous feedback, because teachers are just, with PSHE, it's the bottom of your list. You don't think about it. You get given the slides and you go, oh God, okay, I'll just do it. I'll just do it off the cuff. So what? Right. So you walk in and you put the slide up and you go, well, right. So if you've got any of these symptoms, you've got anxiety, click. Any of these symptoms, you've got depression, click. Now, all of these symptoms are things that we experience every day. I will experience moments of depression every day, anxiety every day, worry every day, anger every day. No problem if I'm going into it for 20 seconds or 20 minutes. Major problem if I'm stuck in it. Now, if I catch any of those symptoms, like I say, it's like a fire alarm going off. It's an alert system. So when you interpret that the right way, when you feel it and you go, oh, that means I'm back whacking myself around the head with my ability to think, I'll ignore that. It's kind of like hearing a fire alarm and going, oh, the building's on fire, I'll exit. If you were taught that when you heard the fire alarm, you need to run deeper into the building, you'd be misinterpreting that signal, and it would be hugely dangerous. And so this is what I see people do all the time with a negative feeling. They get a negative feeling, they make up why they have it, misattribute it to something in the world outside them, and then they run with that. And so in terms of interventions in the classroom, I'm seeing this happen. A lot of misunderstanding happen again and again and again with how these things are actually being taught. So I think that's what people have got to take a look at. I think this real focus on mental health is the way it's being done is very dangerous for our young people. And it's showing in what's happening in society generally. So yeah, I think the school's focusing on mindfulness is a wonderful thing, and all the other interventions, but it's got to be sensitive in the way it's done. And to be honest, teachers should know this. Teachers should really understand what I'm teaching here, because you walk into a classroom when you're green, the kids will meet you in green. So everybody's on the same page. You don't have that teacher-student fight. The kids are engaged and in the moment. They're not thinking about problems at home or this or that. There's a feeling of love in the room. And so you don't need the behavior techniques that most teachers are taught. That's what I experienced very accidentally. And so I think fundamentally, teachers and students need to start to get a deeper sense of who they are. And however that's done is great. If it's through mindfulness, great. If it's through teaching RE, great. But it has to come into a school culture, and everybody's so stressed that a lot of people can't hear what you're saying. I mean, I did a training at Hearts in Essex for the SLT and the whole staff. And I've done one at Leaventhorpe. I would say that in that room, probably about 4 or 5 people out of 200 teachers understood what I was saying, could actually comprehend what I was saying, and didn't think it was just some weird form of positive thinking.
Thanks, Ed. Peter Latham.
What you've just said, Ed, what Ed, yes, and what a number of people have said is, talking to people is a good thing, and certainly my experience is that many people I've come across and been confronted with, and you talk them down, and that's not really that clever. I mean, anybody with any thought or imagination or empathy can talk somebody down who's in a rage or some phase of anxiety. What really is needed is, how do you, when you've talked those people down, not just leave it as a sticking plaster, how do you move on to help the person not to have that rage in the future? I mean, what you've been talking about, I don't see from that how you're going to reinforce bringing the people down, which many of us can do using different techniques.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, so Peter, generally what I do is I get them up to a point. So I have different levels of resources. So initially we'll talk about things, I'll give them the basics. I'll show them resources that psychiatrists have made who teach this. And then what I start to do is I upgrade them to resources that are, well, they're very calming to listen to. All of this work essentially originates from what one man was doing. It was actually a Glaswegian chap. He basically had a massive realization in the 70s and started talking to just local people, helping people with their marriages, etc., etc. And then people with significant mental health conditions started talking to him, and the results were very interesting. So a whole load of psychiatrists and psychologists from LA, San Francisco, and Seattle started to come up and work with this guy. And basically, they then changed what they did. So when I get somebody to the point where they can really start to listen to what this chap has to say, then they're kind of at the point where they're going to be able to do something effective when they get into those really, really low places. And on our website, we have this whole area that we've created for people to constantly revisit. So my hope is that after 6 or 7 sessions, they're good to go on their own and they can just revisit these resources whenever they need them, which seems to be working well. Otherwise, they just come back and we'll chat about things. But this is a lifelong change. Like this is kind of like turning a water wheel. You know, it's like, it's really hard at the start, but once you get it going, it just runs itself. And for me, everybody has this innate resilience and this ability to access the green zone. but they've really got to get it. And sometimes that takes a little while. And so you've just got to remove one misunderstanding and another misunderstanding and another misunderstanding until they just naturally start to go into a low mood, recognize the signal, ignore it, go into a better mood. If they can start to do that as they did when they were really young, no problem. And it's getting them to that point. And that's different with everybody, but resources is the main kind of safety net that we provide, really.
We'll get one last question from Anne Ventura.
Yeah, hello. I am a heart math coach, if you've heard about them. And I would say that what you're talking about when you're in school, I've never worked with children, but I've worked with adults. And there's the one thing I know is that there's all those subconscious down there we're not aware of. So if you would ask me, what do you do when your mother say, woof? I say, I jump up the wall because it's a reaction that I have from a little kid. I'm now 65, maybe it's time to move on. So for example, when I did the heart math course, I went to look into things that triggered my reaction that were not necessarily very good. And I understood what it was. And then they told me how I can replace it with always feelings that bring either compassion, care, gratitude, or love. And the difference it made is amazing, because within really quickly, you know, somebody nearly had an accident with me near the day, and normally I would have exploded. And then I didn't, because I was learning to use different emotions. And by using those different emotions, I raise my frequency. And by raising my frequency, I'm not on lower level. And I can bring compassion. I just felt sorry for the guy, thinking, well, he cut me like that because he was missing his exits. He had absolutely no intention to have an accident. No, of course he didn't. Just as an example. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I had my heart operation where they were chopping me in half. They did an intention with me. I've used the heart math. And if you know what being scared is, I was shit scared, okay? And when they took me down the theater, by the time I got there, I was as cool as a cucumber. I knew they wouldn't be able to put any needles in my wrist. And I was there saying to them, don't worry, we'll get it together. I mean, the difference are incredible. And lately, and you know, the more you work at it, the more you shift, the more you work at it, the more you shift. But you have to have the understanding of what is there and what has been creating problem. And not only my life is getting so much better, but I can manage synchronicity for wonderful things happening to me. And I think if people take the time to, and when you say resilience doesn't matter, I think resilience is very important, personally.
You want to add anything to this, Ed?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. I agree. So for me, it's just we're born with resilience. We're born with creativity and happiness. They're not ideas. They're what happens when our mind goes quiet.
Yeah, but then by the time you're born and you're being sent so much crap by everybody around until you're 7, because your brain is in different waves until you're 7, then all that's been downloaded, because that's how we learn, but nobody's aware of it. So I think sometimes, depending what's been downloaded, then it needs waking up, thinking, yeah, that's kiddies download, it's normal. We don't need it.
And we're going to have to move on because we're past our time. Ed, can I just thank you so much? We're so lucky to have your support.
That was fantastic.
And thanks
No,
for
thank
talking.
you for your support. Thank you
Enjoyed
for
by everyone. Now, this is our last talk for 2020. Next year, we're moving to one talk per month, and members of Stort Valley are organising club nights each month between the speaker evenings. Our next talk is on the 24th of January, and it will be about Marco Polo, the Silk Route, and China's Belt and Road Initiative, delivered by one of our members, Ian Priest. And I look forward to seeing you all then. The club's focus over the next 2 weeks will be the setting up of a virtual Christmas festival, where we'll be recording and sharing Christmas cheer on social media through 10 local choirs and bands. Something very new for us and something for everyone to look forward to, I hope. It does seem a bit early, but could I just hope all your Christmas celebrations go well, and look forward to seeing you all in 2021. So that now just leaves me to invite you all to join me in a toast to the Queen, Rotary, and peace and health the world over. The Queen, Rotary, peace and health. Well, thank you all and good night.
Good night.